If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm your host, Kathryn Hansen, and for those of you who are new to the show, I'm the author of Brain Over Binge and the Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide. I've been recovered from bulimia for about 14 years now. It was around this time of year in 2005 that I had my last binge, and since that time, it's been my goal to help others overcome this problem as well, because I know how it feels to be stuck in the binge eating habit, and I want everyone to have freedom from it. I know it's been a little while since I've released an episode, but today I want to talk about something that's been on my mind related to my approach and its simplicity. If you're a regular listener, you may notice that I use the word simple a lot to describe my approach. I use it in the introduction to every episode when I say, you'll learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. The word simple is also part of the subtitle of the Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide, which was my second book. The subtitle is A Simple and Personalized Plan for Ending Bulimia and Binge Eating Disorder. I think back to around the end of 2015 when I got the proof of the Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide book, and I looked at the thickness of this book that I had just finished writing, which was 378 pages. And I read the subtitle that I had chosen, and I kind of laughed at myself a little, because I imagined future readers to see this subtitle with the word simple in it, and then see the thickness of the book, and wonder how in the world this approach could be simple. On the surface, without reading the book, it does seem like a contradiction. I did briefly think about changing the subtitle at the last minute because I did not want the reader to be confused by this. But I ultimately decided to stick with that subtitle because I trusted that the reader would understand why I use the word simple once they dove into the book. At its core, the Brain Over Binge approach is simple in that you focus on just two recovery goals: learning to dismiss the urges to binge and learning to eat adequately. The approach is simple in that you do not need to solve all of your other problems. You do not need to learn to cope perfectly with all of your emotions. You do not need to create a happy and fulfilling life in order to recover. You do not need to develop great relationships or control your circumstances or avoid triggers. You do not need to eat in one exact right way. You do not need to be at your ideal weight in order to end the binge eating habit. In the Brain Over Binge approach, you narrow your focus on ending the harmful habit, and you learn to use the power of your own brain to do that. But in order to understand why a simple approach is possible, there's a lot of explaining that I needed to do, and a lot of background information that I needed to give, which is part of the reason for the length of my books. Another reason that my approach is simple but my books are long is because the two recovery goals of dismissing binge urges and eating adequately are not typically goals that you wake up and decide to do and then you do both goals perfectly until you're binge-free. Learning to dismiss the binge urges requires a new perspective surrounding those urges so that you can experience them in a new way, which allows you to avoid acting on them. And it can take practice to avoid acting on them. As I've talked about in previous episodes, you'll need to learn to become aware of your thinking and how your urges are leading you into action. You need to be able to experience your own power over these urges, and this may not come right away. You may need to do some troubleshooting to improve your ability to dismiss the urges. You may need to do some experimenting to determine what works uniquely for you to help you avoid acting on those urges to binge. Habit change can be a process that is unique to each person, even though there are, of course, similarities in all habits based on the way that the human brain works. As it relates to the second recovery goal, eating adequately, this can also be something that requires some learning or even a great deal of learning. You certainly do not need to eat perfectly, but if you're used to restriction and not giving your body enough food, then you'll need to learn to nourish yourself properly so that your physical needs are met. As you've likely heard me say before, it's impossible to stop binge eating for good if you continue depriving your body of enough food. Dieting and also binge eating itself has negative effects on your appetite regulation, so that learning to eat normally may be a process for you. All of this is not to say that recovery is always a long road. I do not believe that's the case, and one of my main goals is to empower you to believe that you absolutely can stop this habit and move on with your life, and that it does not have to be overly complicated. But I want to be clear that I'm not telling you to, quote, just stop the habit and move on with your life. I think that's where some people misinterpret the simplicity of my approach. They think I'm saying the solution to binge eating is to just stop the binge eating. And of course, in any approach to stopping binge eating, the goal is ultimately to stop the binge eating, but it understandably makes people upset if they think someone is telling them, well, if you're having a problem with binging, just stop binging. I would have been upset too when I was in the depths of my problem if someone would have said to, quote, just stop. That would have made me very angry because I was, of course, trying to stop. Of course, I did not want to be binging. If I could have just stopped, I would have. So when you hear me say in these episodes or in my books that you have the power to stop binging, I fully realize that there's much more to this than just stopping. I do believe that in many approaches, recovery is too overcomplicated, especially if you've learned through other approaches that you're flawed or broken or diseased, or you need to fundamentally transform yourself in order to recover. I strongly believe you should keep your recovery from binge eating as simple as possible. I don't think you need to change so many parts of your life or change your personality or your relationships or think you need to eat perfectly or love your body all the time or have amazing self-esteem in order to stop this habit. In the Brain Over Binge approach, recovery is fundamentally about stopping a harmful habit that you've inadvertently developed. But if I believed that the solution to stopping the binge eating habit was to tell yourself to just stop or to have someone else tell you to stop, then my books would not be over 600 pages in total. I believe that you definitely can stop your habit, and like I say at the end of every show, you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. But this approach is not just about telling yourself to quit. I'm sure you've already done that 1,000 times. To use the concepts that I teach, it may take letting go of some old ideas that are no longer serving you. It may take realizing that the binge eating is not doing anything positive for you. It may take a new understanding of how your brain is working to get you to binge. It may take learning to consistently nourish your body, and it will likely take some practice to learn to recognize your binge urges and then to dismiss them. I hope that the Brain Over Binge approach does give you a much more efficient path to ending this habit by cutting out any unnecessary confusion. But I definitely do not want you to feel like a failure or to feel like you're doing something wrong if you can't just stop. You're learning, and you will improve, and you will overcome this habit, whether it's using my approach or a combination of my approach and something else, or something else entirely. I want to mention here that I wrote a blog post this month for people who do resonate with the ideas that I share, but they still find themselves acting on urges to binge. Actually, this was an older blog post that I updated and improved, but if you're listening to this episode around the time it's released, this blog post will appear first if you go to brainoverbinge.com and you click on blog. The post is titled, Are You Still Acting on Urges to Binge? Tips for Binge Eaters Who Are Struggling in Recovery. And it contains some useful ideas if you're someone who definitely wants to change this habit, but you're frustrated because the urges still seem to be getting the best of you. If you can relate to this, I hope that you'll go read this post, and I'll also put a link to it in the show notes. I give several suggestions in the post about overcoming some common problems you may be having in recovery. The last suggestion I give, which I also want to talk about here, is getting some additional guidance in recovery. There are many options for getting additional guidance or support, and I've had several great guests on the show who offer support, but I do have an opportunity that I want to share with you if you are interested in getting more help from me in using the Brain Over Binge ideas. If you've been a regular listener to the podcast, you may have heard about the 8-week course in the past, but I want you to know that I've made some significant changes to the course in 2019. The change that I'm most excited about is that I've recorded audios that discuss and thoroughly answer 84 questions that I've been asked over the years. I still can't quite believe that I recorded 84 Q&A audios, but I truly love doing it because I believe that I addressed, in at least some way, most of the issues that could come up for you in recovery. And when I think about these audios, it gets back to what I've been saying about the simplicity of this approach. I look at this extensive audio library and I still say that this is a simple approach. Because at their core, these audios are still centered around the two fundamentally simple recovery goals. But what I hope that these audios also illustrate for you is that this is not a just quit approach. I understand that you're unique. I understand that you have questions and concerns about eating and about your weight and about relapse and emotions and stress and many other aspects of recovery. I understand what it's like to be where you are. So I try to talk about as many potential issues as I could to help you as you implement this ultimately simple approach. I put a link in the show notes to learn more about the course and to sign up if you decide that it's right for you. Thank you so much for listening today. If you're someone who's been listening to the show for a while, or you're someone who's read my books but you have not yet stopped binging, I hope that today's episode was helpful to you and gave you some options to keep moving forward toward freedom from this habit. Even if it takes you longer than someone else to recover, or even if it requires more guidance, I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.